Welcome to the Irishman, Englishman and Scotsman Football Podcast. Hello, good evening and welcome to another episode of the Irishman, Englishman and Scotsman Football Podcast. Joining me as usual, the dynamic trio, Fino in sunny Edinburgh. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, not bad. How are you guys?
Joe, still stranded in Brighton?
Still here, yeah. Still drowning my sorrows after Saints' 1 point in 47.
Kev looks very chirpy and happy in sunny Salzburg. Not missing the Spanish rays, Kev.
No, it's all basking, veritably basking in Salzburg.
Yeah, the weather has been good. We're going to run through the next 3 days, Premier League games, as usual. Speaking of Salzburg, I just want to bring you a bit of bad news. Good mate of mine, actually, good friend of a lot of people here, a guy called Des McAleenan, who was the goalkeeping coach for Red Bull Salzburg for a while, the goalkeeping coach for New York Red Bulls, the United States national team, and the Colombian national team. He passed away this week, so sad news there. Okay, moving on. Tonight there's a game, Manchester City, the machine who don't lose, at home to Wolves. City, of course, beat West Ham, Fino 2-1. I'll get your take on that in a second. Wolves, I thought, were really poor against Newcastle. They're a threat from the wide areas with Traore and, I can't think of the guy's name on the right wing. Left-footed player, keeps cutting in. Portuguese.
Pedro Neto, I think.
Neto, that's his name. Yeah, that guy, really tricky wingers. But Newcastle had loads of chances and Wolves let Newcastle in and basically dominated the game from midfield. We can only see City winning here, of course, but how long is this run going to go on? And, looking at the score, Fino, for a second, West Ham went 1-0 up.
No, we didn't.
You didn't get 1-0 up?
We equalised.
Okay. You messaged the group and Antonio had scored and I thought, wow, could this be on? Could this be the game where Man City finally slipped?
Well, yeah, and I think when West Ham did equalise, they suddenly came into their ascendancy a little bit and really started to try and pin Man City back. But I was going to say that West Ham kind of showed that Man City are kind of not infallible, but they've scored 51 goals and conceded 7 over the last 20 games. I mean, it's remarkable. And I think the scary thing is about that West Ham victory is they won in a very non-typical Pep way. They really ground that result out. Yes, the goals were technically very good, but they really kind of did have to, work hard. And that's with £350 million worth of players left on the bench. Fresh, raring to go. I just can't see anything for Wolves from here.
I think it must be your season when your two centre-half score. They just seem to be able to get goals from absolutely anywhere on the pitch. So that's 20 in a row now, I think, isn't it? And yeah, I can't see them losing anytime soon. The only time I can see them maybe losing in the league is if they have a couple of big, Champions League games where they rest a lot of players. But they just seem to be on this train that has so much momentum. I can't see anyone stopping them, and definitely not Wolves.
Injuries also, Joe, will come into play. I looked at an injury table list today where Leicester and Palace have 9 players out. Liverpool have 8 players out. Newcastle have 7, something like this. But Man City have about 1 missing. So yeah, I mean, they're an awesome team, but that definitely helps. Wednesday, 7 o'clock Central European time, kickoff at Turf Moor. Burnley, who were hammered by Tottenham. Spurs are back against Leicester, who really shocked us all. Leicester got a goal early against Arsenal, but then went on to lose 3-1. And we all fancied Leicester to win this game. Well, I did anyway. Are Arsenal back? Who knows? But definitely Tottenham are back, and Burnley felt the wrath of it. Burnley, of course, not entirely safe yet. They look to try and get something from this game, but I fancy Brendan's men to bounce back here. Fino?
It's a tough result for Leicester, and I think actually the biggest loss of that game was Harvey Barnes. The fact that he needs surgery, he's been taken off on a stretcher in a leg brace. It'll be really interesting to see how Leicester reacts, as such a key part of them going forward. Yeah, Burnley, I mean, they looked terrible at the back against Tottenham. Really a shadow of the team that, I've been waxing lyrical about over the last couple of weeks. And it'll be interesting to see. You would hope that Leicester can manage to bounce back, but you just never know when, such a horrible injury happens. Like has happened with Harvey Barnes. could there be conclusions drawn alongside, a Van Dijk Liverpool style, injury to somebody who's pivotal to that team's success? It'll be interesting to see.
I think he's good, Harvey Barnes. I really like Harvey Barnes. I would love Liverpool to sign him. I don't think he's that fundamental to the Leicester side. I don't think we're talking quite about a Van Dijk thing, and I don't think we're talking about that such a long absence either. I think you're right, though. I think it's a really good test for them because it was a pretty nasty result. Leicester have had a couple of nasty results over the course of the season. They've lost a couple of games, quite heavily. So I think they definitely have it in them to come back. I'm intrigued actually at some point, maybe not today, the way the fixtures work out, but I'm interested in what Arsenal fans think of Odegaard, who I think came off the bench and looked pretty tasty. He's obviously a massively talented player and I think had a bit of an influence on that game in the second half. But yeah, big test for Leicester.
I just wanted to say on Leicester, obviously we saw last season they looked like they were nailed on for top four. And then they missed out on the last game of the season. And you just wonder, the closer we get to the end of the season when they are in the top four, if they lose a couple of games, whether they might, I don't want to say bottle it, but they might, lose out again. It must be in their mind somewhere. So I think this will be a really, really interesting game to see where they are.
The only thing that I would say there, Joe, is that, even though it's only 4 points difference between themselves and West Ham, that still feels like, a chasm up in that kind of really top end of the table. Those 4 points could be, just enough to see them safe. But then, as you say, you've got teams like Everton, Chelsea, Liverpool, etc., all kind of chomping at the bit to get after it. It'll be interesting to see how they handle it.
I think in a normal season, Fino, I would agree with you 100%, those 4 points, but just this is a crazy year. And look, Newcastle, for example, are 10 points clear of Fulham, and then all of a sudden they're almost in the bottom three, Anybody can beat anybody on their day. Results are very difficult to pick. Leicester, the 4 points, you'd rather have the 4 points than play on without Harvey Barnes. But, it'll be interesting. I wouldn't predict, I couldn't predict the places 2, 3 and 4 at the minute. Fino?
Actually, just looking at their games remaining, because I think we're now starting to get into that point where we can start to see trends as to the teams that they'll be playing in the run-in. They still have to play Man City, West Ham, Man United, Chelsea and Tottenham. So there's 5 games of their remaining, say, 12 that are against teams that are battling against them for European spots. That's really not a very easy run-in compared to some of their competitors. You'd
also wonder though, Fino, could it be a slight advantage that they got knocked out in Europe? With regards to more injuries and stuff and less games to play for Leicester. It might be a blessing in disguise. Bramall Lane also at 7 o'clock Central European time on Wednesday. Sheffield United sit against Aston Villa. Sheffield United beaten by Liverpool. Kev, Aston Villa, of course, ground out a win against Leeds. I have to say they're really impressive defensively. They limited Leeds to almost nothing. Any kind of promise at all from Sheffield United, Kev?
Yes. They're obviously organised. The goalkeeper did really well, certainly for the first 60 minutes or whatever it was. He looked like he was having the game of the season. So you sort of thought, well, there's a chance for them. They did have a couple of chances, didn't they? So I just think, in front of goal, they don't look like a side who are going to stay up. Honestly, if I had to bet, I'm not betting on them. I really don't think they've got that much of a chance. But what happens to Ryan Brewster, by the way? Does anyone know? I don't think when you're that sort of club, you can afford like a 20-odd million pound payout and get basically nothing back for it. So not surprised there.
I mean, what I seen there, I watched the Newcastle Sheffield United game a few weeks back, and he came off the bench. But I think he's been coming off the bench a lot. They started with the, I think it's Billy Sharp who scored the penalty. So Ryan Brewster, a big money signing. His potential is what they bought. He's by far from the finished article, and I don't think he's got as much game time as he would have liked.
I think it's a really good example and learning, isn't it? Like we've been talking for the last few weeks about, Brighton need a 15, 20 goal a season striker. You could probably say the same for Fulham, Burnley, and actually going out and spending 20 million doesn't always get you a striker who can score lots of goals in the Premier League. It's really not easy. I think Chris Wilder said himself this weekend, didn't he, that they're essentially down. I think he's almost admitted it. And Villa, like you say, were very impressive against Leeds. After Leeds beat Southampton 3-0, I thought, blimey, no one's going to go there and win for a while, and then 3 days later Villa go there and win while in first gear still. So it just shows you how bad Southampton are. But Villa I think should win this one, and then that'll be 5 defeats on the spin for Sheffield United.
And Villa still have 2 games in hand, basically, on the teams at the top 4. So they're 6 points behind. They're right in the mix there for potentially top 4. Grealish, having been injured, coming back to injury, it'll be interesting to see how that Villa team can react. I still think that they've got too much for Sheffield United, though.
How much credit do you think we should give John Terry for Aston Villa's defence? He seems to have made a huge difference this season. You just wonder if John Terry may branch out on his own next season and be a manager.
Well, if they win anything or get anywhere, John Terry will be there in the full kit, in the picture at the end of the season. Don't worry about that, Joe. He'll be there. Going back to your £20 million striker thing, guaranteeing goals. I mean, Newcastle spent $40 million on Joe Linton and he couldn't hit a barn door. Selhurst Park on Wednesday night, 9:15 Central European time. Crystal Palace against Manchester United. Palace held by Fulham, or could it be Fulham held by Palace? I think Fulham were the better team from what I've seen of it against Manchester United, who didn't really impress that much against Chelsea. There was a lot of screams from Old Trafford about the penalty shout, which I thought would have been very soft anyway. Ball to hand to ball, who knows? But I mean, United, I've seen a funny stat. Somebody sent me a funny stat this week. I think it was Palace, City, Man United, Man City, Man United, Chelsea, Man United, Arsenal. All these games against the top teams have ended 0-0 for Man United. So, Solskjaer, are you Mourinho in disguise? Palace are more or less safe. Nothing really to play for. Ground out the draw, like I said, against Fulham. Man United will be looking over their shoulders slightly. No chance of catching Man City, but you'd still fancy them to have too much for Palace. Fino?
Palace are just so utterly dull to watch. If there was one team that could go down based on like a public vote, I think Crystal Palace would get my vote. They've picked up 4 points in their last 2 games with 6 shots in total. That's a shot every half hour is not what football's all about. And fair play to Roy Hodgson for setting his team up in a way that, they don't get beat, etc. But I disagree with you, JP. I thought United looked as dominant a team against another top 4 side as they have in a long time. I thought Rashford and Greenwood played really well. They put that Chelsea backline under a fair bit of pressure. I think there probably was a good shout for handball there, especially under the current rules. Was it Hudson-Odoi? His hand was he basically just punched it.
It also looked like the Manchester United forward raised his arm to the ball as well. So it could have been given either way. And if you actually look at the reaction, the Chelsea players initially put their hands up for handball against Greenwood.
Yeah.
So it could have went either way. And I think because of that, the referee was, his mind was made up. Just going off topic completely here, but there was a crazy decision at Brighton against West Brom, where there was a free kick given, and I think it was for a handball. I don't know if you guys seen the game, but basically, I think it was Lewis Dunn kicked the ball into the net as referee was putting the whistle into his mouth. Obviously, he said, "Look, no goal." Then he gave the goal, then stopped it, and then in the end, it was no goal. So there's got to be some kind of consistency with this thing, Joe.
Yeah, I think that was a shocker, the Brighton one. But just going back to Man United, how crazy was it that Solskjaer came out and moaned that Man United weren't getting enough penalties? How many have they had since he's been a manager? 172 or something? They literally it must have had a penalty every game for this season. So to come out and moan that they weren't getting enough, I thought was ridiculous.
I think I saw a couple of things on social media where it was Man United fans saying it was after Klopp had made some comments about it. So you know what it's like. There's always a bit of conspiracy theory going backwards and forwards about who deserves it and who's got more influence. So yeah, I agree with you, Joe. It's not much substance to that in that case, I didn't think. And yeah, the VAR in the West Brom game was absolute. I mean, it was hilarious, actually. I mean, it was ludicrous. But if you're not a fan of either side, it was just so stupid. Everyone's standing around and no one knowing what's going on. You just sort of think, well, the ref should at least know the rules, if nothing else.
He really panicked, didn't he? You just saw the panic in Lee Mason's face. You almost felt for him.
Moving on to Thursday at Craven Cottage, huge game for Fulham and for Newcastle and the likes around there. Fulham against Tottenham, 7 o'clock. Fulham, of course, held by Palace. Spurs were pretty impressive, lads, against Burnley. 4-0 winners. Gareth Bale, in particular, is he back, Fino?
I mean, one game does not a career make. I think I actually want to talk about Fulham here because I feel like this is really a huge game for them, and the game against Palace didn't obviously go the way that they wanted it to. They had the better chances. It's a flip from what I said last week where they had that little slice of luck. Now these are the kind of games where it's the kind of coulda, woulda, shoulda that you look back on at the end of a season and go, well, if this had gone our way, then maybe we would have stayed up. You know, after the Tottenham game, they've also got Liverpool, they've also got Man City. So really it's an opportunity for teams around Fulham to start to pull away. And then you just wonder how good a manager Scott Parker is. If he can keep his team morale up when there's that potential, psychological gap of maybe, 5-6 points going into the last, say, 6-8 games of the season. Tottenham, yeah, they did look much better. I think they were helped by, a pretty leaky Burnley defence. I think Tottenham should have more than enough here to beat Fulham. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Scott Parker keeps his team going. Where
has this Tottenham been for the last couple of months? You're right, they were fantastic against Burnley. Some of the goals they scored were brilliant. Kane's back in the goals, Bale, Lucas Moura, Son, Dele Alli's playing well again. You just wondered, if they'd have managed to kind of keep that level of performance, they'd be right in there in the top four battle. And I do worry for Fulham because you think this is not a good time to play Tottenham. They're one of those teams that they can go on a run. It wouldn't surprise you if they go and win the next 4 or 5 games. So you'd have to say that Tottenham and Kane should have enough to beat Fulham.
You wonder if it's the fact that they're back into the Europa League. The idea of playing, we always talk and moan the idea of the Thursday, Sunday. But actually there's also some, usefulness in that you're kind of just on autopilot. You can't really overthink your opponent. You just have to worry about what you can do. And I think potentially there is an element of Mourinho kind of, trying to really outsmart his opponent rather than playing to his team's strengths. Tottenham play great expansive football when they're kind of allowed to just run free. And if they're then constrained, and I know there's been, leaks in the press that they've kind of been only training their defence and that sort of thing. If they're allowed to just kind of do what they want, then actually they're quite an exciting team.
I think that must be the sort of lineup that Spurs fans were dreaming of, earlier in the season, and the performance as well. All I'd say is I don't want to put a downer on them because I thought they were pretty good. The only thing is you scored that early, against a very limited team, and obviously it does make life quite a lot easier, doesn't it? And I think they will have a trickier game. Obviously, they're up against a team who are very, very solid in defence. I don't think Fulham will win because I don't think they'll be able to score the number of goals that they would need to score to win this game. But I think it will be tougher. It is a derby, and there'll be absolutely no gimme there for them at all. And so I think, money's probably on Tottenham, but I reckon it'll be a lot tighter. Maybe a sneaky 2-1.
They won't have as much of the ball as they did have against Burnley, that's for sure, because Fulham keep the ball. They keep it for, it seems like, hours. And now Spurs are only 6 points off 4th place, West Ham in 4th, with the game in hand. So if they do go on a run, Mourinho could find himself back in the Champions League places, and all is not lost, and they could win the Europa League, and who knows. Moving on to the Hawthorns, 7 o'clock, West Brom against Everton. West Brom in that crazy win, Joe, against Brighton, where they got the goal. Brighton missed 2 penalties and had a goal disallowed, which probably should have been a goal against Everton, who upset you last night, Joe.
Yeah, where to start? No, I mean, Everton weren't amazing last night. To only score 1 against Southampton isn't a huge achievement at the moment. They got the early goal with Richarlison, who always seems to score against Saints. I saw afterwards that Ancelotti was kind of talking about the top 4, so they'll be going to West Brom full of confidence. You're right, the West Brom-Brighton game was absurd. You just can't miss 2 penalties in the Premier League. And you just think with Brighton now, it's happened so many times. I think it's more of a mental thing that they just can't score. It's like they're cursed. They just can't score, and West Brom took full advantage. But still, they're going to need a lot more wins. I still think West Brom are down. Everton, on their run of form, will go there and win fairly comfortably.
West Brom, I think, without a doubt, they rode their luck a little bit. And I know that, we can talk about Brighton, but there is an element of luck there for West Brom in that dodgy disallowed goal and giving away 2 penalties and to come away with a clean sheet is very impressive. They can't, can they? They can't stay up. 9 points is surely too much of a gap. But if they do go down, I think, there will be Premier League teams looking at some of their players and looking to pick them off on the cheap. I think Kyle Bartley won't be at the Hawthorns next season. I think he's consistently looked really good for them. Another, ex-Arsenal youth player who's gone on to do well at a pretty decent level. Everton, yeah, they can jump into 4th here, if only for a couple of hours. They do have a really good team, and when they're playing well, it's really quite an exciting time, I think, to be an Everton fan. I hope that they don't jump into 4th, but I can see them definitely doing so. And West Brom, Big Sam, they needed 9 wins from 13 games or whatever. I don't think they're going to get their second.
I think Ancelotti said, didn't he, that he wants the team in 4th to taste what it's like and to get used to it. So even if it is only for a few hours, depending on what happens, the following or later on. I think he wants them just to get used to it, because it is going to be a question of bottle now, isn't it? So you've got Man City up there, obviously untouchable. I still think all the rest of you were saying you can't predict it, and they are it's all there to play for, because everyone has been basically as inconsistent as everyone else. And so it really is going to come down to, can any one of those teams put together a sort of 5 wins in 7, a 6 wins in 8, and power through? Everton, it will be a question of bottle, I think, because they are really good.
I started to question that, Fino, during the Brighton West Brom game, when there was 2 missed penalties. That goal, which was a goal, disallowed, and Big Sam's going off with a smile on his head, and he's probably thinking, "I've never been relegated from the Premier League. I've never been relegated. Still got a chance." Everton are capable of absolute horrible performances as well. In the last month or 6 weeks, they've played really badly against Fulham and Newcastle. Lost both games. They can turn it on, of course. They've got some great players. You'd imagine on paper they've got too much for West Brom. West Brom will have confidence after that win, and they'll be full of beans and fighting for their lives, really. So this has the makings of a really good game, as Fulham and Spurs do. But yeah, I fancy Everton. I think they'll have too much. Now, the game of midweek at Anfield. Liverpool are back, Kev. Nobody's talking about injuries anymore. Everything's fine again. Liverpool in 6th place on 43 points against Chelsea, who are in 5th on 44. This could go a long way to decide who finishes up in the Champions League places. Chelsea, I thought, were okay against Man United. Fino, I thought they did all right. I mean, they're not, setting the house on fire or anything, but they're becoming harder to beat under Thomas Tuchel, and they're solid. Kev, I didn't watch Liverpool against Sheffield United. Everything back to normal?
God no, absolutely not. I think we're a long way from that, and it's not. Yes, it is partly the injuries, and I think that's probably what's going to hurt them. In midweek, I think if you're looking at Kabak and Phillips as your centre backs again, if that's what they go for, I think if you're looking at Adrian in goal. I think there's just going to be too many opportunities for Chelsea there. I would love it if Liverpool could turn up at Anfield and put all the problems that they've had at home the last few weeks, to bed, that they would play with that sort of swagger again. But I think we're a long way from that. So I suspect, and I think you're absolutely right, Tuchel is by, tendency quite, he started off in quite defensive fashion. I think they'll be very cautious in this game. I think we may see a pretty boring game decided by the odd goal.
Fino, I'm sure you'll take a draw here.
Oh, absolutely. And as a West Ham fan, I can only empathise with Kev about the performances of Adrian. It's something to behold. Look, it's a big game, and people will rightly heap pressure on Liverpool, I think regardless of the result. And sure, if they lose, they're a minimum of 4 points off of the top 4. But again, I go back to this idea of looking at what the run-in looks like. They only have to play one more team in European contention between now and the end of the season. And if you compare that to someone like Chelsea, who have to play West Ham, City, Arsenal and Leicester, suddenly it starts to feel like an absolute must-win game for a Chelsea, and maybe just a must-not-lose for Liverpool. Hopefully it's a draw, though. That would be the ideal situation for me. Chelsea unbeaten in their last 6, I think it is, albeit with 2 consecutive draws. It's set up to be a very interesting game. It'll just be whether or not Tuchel draws, the team comes out of their shell and plays at Anfield, or whether or not they just shut up shop.
It's amazing, isn't it, when you think about it, the amount of money that these teams have spent. This is 5th v 6th at this stage in the season. And obviously, being a Saints fan, I hadn't looked at the league table for a couple of weeks because it was just far too depressing. But I've just checked it now and didn't realise that Liverpool were 19 points behind Man City, having played the same number of games. Just absurd.
Well, that is what happens when you lose about 5 games in a row, Joe. So, I mean, you weren't looking at the table, but the rest of us were. It's been an absolute sorry run. And I'm not going to harp on about injuries because there were one or two slightly positive noises. Keita back, who I think is we all think has got so much potential at least. And Jota were assured might be somewhere near to starting again. So rays of hope or whatever. So we'll take them where we get them.
Don't talk about injuries, Kev. Newcastle are missing the whole front 3 until the end of the month, probably April. All were injured against Wolves, which is good news for Fulham, really, because Newcastle have a half decent run coming up. Fulham don't, but I can't see us picking up too many points. That's the fixtures for the midweek games, folks. We will be back, of course, on Friday night, but before we go anywhere, a few words of wisdom. Kev.
Let's see. Just think how hard it is each week to come up with a new technique to sum up football so sublime and set the weekend games in rhyme. So for a change, let these freeze frames stand to depict week 26. Short and sweet, pithy, terse, like Liverpool, it could be worse. John Stones, Curtis Jones, VAR groans and Ole moans. Fulham draw, they just can't score while Bale purrs for 4-star Spurs. For perfect Pep, still no missteps. City's art a class apart. A dozen wins now on the spin and Hammers take it on the chin. You think to stop them in their tracks, goals come from their centre-backs. They disappear, now 12 clear, we'll try again another year. Man United on their shoulder, Chelsea firm but must be bolder. Tuchel's tactics too defensive for a team so damn expensive. Same again for Ollie's men, scoreless when they get no pen. That's not fair to Mr. Ollie, I take it back, I'm very sorry. Back to Leicester, pummeled hard by Arsenal and Odegaard. For quite a while the teams looked hollow, but Pepe leads, his teammates follow. And Liverpool went back to school, got decent grades against the Blades. There's some hope, however faint, so from me there's no complaint. Well, maybe there's one thing I'd mock. It makes the league a laughing stock. Decision-making that gets dafter, reducing all who watch to laughter. What the hell was going on as Brighton visited West Brom? Penalties to post a bar, but things would get still more bizarre. With Brighton's goal twice disallowed, thank goodness that we had no crowd. No, I don't blame the referees. It must be hard trying to please fans and pundits, mostly fools. But please, at least, let's learn the rules.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Kev.
Pleasure. Speak soon.
Fino, thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you, Joe.
Speak soon, thanks.
Thanks for listening, folks. This has been the Irishman, Englishman and Scotsman Football Podcast. We will be back on Friday night. Enjoy the games.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more of our podcasts, please click on the red subscribe button on the bottom right-hand side. Thank you.